I've been really looking forward to this interview of Marc. We've been fortunate enough to have some great people on the show, but Marc's background is so interesting. He's been in the middle of some of the most important innovations in financial services, going back to his time at Drexel and the advent of the high yield market, which has been so important in finance, and then to co-founding Apollo and creating, a $1 trillion private markets firm. If you think about the importance of the private markets, that makes Apollo one of the most important financial institutions in the world. Having gotten to know Marc a little bit over the years, he's also just an incredibly thoughtful person. So I think our wealth managers and our asset managers will really enjoy hearing his thoughts on leadership, culture, et cetera. So looking forward to the conversation. Hey, Marc. How are you?
Welcome to Apollo.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Come.
Yeah.
My home away from home. I start each day perched right there. What could I get you?
I'll have a tea. Be great.
2 teas, a peppermint tea for me.
Chamomile for me. Thank you. Do you get a lot of traffic here every day?
This is an unbelievable thing. So we feed everyone 2 meals a day, and whatever it costs, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The collaboration, the casual collisions, the commonality that people feel, energy is just awesome. People come here from our competitors and they have lunch here. They can't believe it.
Our whole experience with you guys is as soon as you tell one person, the entire team seems to know what's going on. The communication loop seems really tight.
It's hard. Look, as you know this, people join firms, but they stay for cultures.
Yep.
Most talented people can work anywhere they want. And when you were a little company, you knew everyone at the company. We were a little company, I knew everyone.
Yep.
But now we have to be really intentional about who we are and what we want to be.
Yeah, that's for sure. Marc, thank you so much for doing this today. I really, really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah. So maybe let's start with the early days growing up. Tell us about that. Did you have any early sort of influences or mentors in your life?
I won't say early in that way. I grew up going back and forth between New York and Florida. Ultimately went to high school in Hollywood, Florida. Most people in my family, adults, were public interest lawyers. So for one reason or another, I assumed that I would be a lawyer and go to law school. I actually was accepted to a pre-law program at a great school, and then the coursework arrived, and I looked at it and said, this is terrible. So I called Penn and the Wharton School, where I was also accepted, sight unseen, and said, can I still go? And somehow I ended up there, and when I arrived, it just made sense.
Yeah.
And I got to Drexel, and it just made sense.
Yeah, well, before Drexel, what was your first job? Did you have any early, career? Because I don't think you had a traditional path into finance.
Oh no, I've had a lot of different jobs.
Yeah.
I was a valet parker at the Diplomat Hotel, now the Shell Bay Golf Club. I would drive cars between New York and Florida for snowbirds transporting their cars for the winter. I worked in a party goods store, and I worked for the best kosher caterer in South Florida. Every one of those jobs you have to take something away from.
Yeah, no kidding.
And then when I started getting a little bit of education, I worked at Booz Allen for a summer in financial consulting. I worked on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and was then the Blue Room as a runner.
Yep.
And I managed to keep busy, but my first real job was coming out of school for Drexel Merrill.
So let's talk about Drexel. So I think mid-80s you joined Drexel.
Joined Drexel at the end of 1984.
Okay, so one of the most exciting times in the history of finance, the high yield market was being invented, and you sat at the intersection between M&A advice and the high yield finance buyouts. I remember I was an analyst at Morgan Stanley at the time, and every day I'd start the day looking at the top fold of the Wall Street Journal and see a new buyout that usually Drexel had financed. That was such an incredible experience. What did you take away from all that?
First, it was an amazing experience, really formative in terms of how I think. But it really, for me, it was clean sheet thinking. The team, and particularly the leadership, was not limited by what had been done before, because most of what they were doing had never been done before. They were seeing and asking themselves, what's the right answer to this? What should exist that does not exist? And whether it was silver-backed bonds or PIK securities or the whole notion of a commitment letter, everything was about common sense brought into a business context. The other and really interesting thing, historically, the banking business had been about serving established clients whose business, at least in the short term, was not at risk. We were optimizing in the banking business their capital structure. We were raising debt and equity. Drexel was the first really large-scale experience working with entrepreneurs who were creating and doing. Now we take for granted that cable television should exist, but the notion that people would pay for TV was a new notion. The notion that people would pay for cellular was a new notion. Satellite. So many of the things we take for granted were entrepreneurial visions, and the ability and willingness to roll up your sleeves and figure out a business with an entrepreneur and then ask, what makes sense?
Let's pivot for a second to innovation. It feels to me like Apollo, and this is probably as a function of your leadership, has really embraced innovation. You're investing in lots of technology things. It feels like it's almost part of the DNA. What does that process look like here at Apollo?
You know, it comes back to what we do as CEO and ultimately what the team around us, the next gen, does. But the way you get to be CEO is you're actually really good at doing stuff. And therefore they make you CEO. And once you get to be CEO, you don't get to do any stuff anymore, because you realize it's not worth your time. Your job is to make everyone else's job easier. And so I think of my job as strategy, culture, communication, and dealing with the unexpected. Culture is every day. Yeah. I think is a big part of the job. The unexpected comes when it comes, and you deal with it.
This is a really hard question because the days come and go, but what % of your time do you think you spend focused on culture-related items?
I want to say it's close to half.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the internal culture and the cohesion of doing it, it's how the message is communicated, it's how it's conveyed externally. So culture and communication are very hard to separate. I think that's half the job. If you're sitting in India in our office, most people went to India for labor arbitrage. Most people are thinking about India potentially being very at risk on AI. If you don't get on a plane and go have the conversation with your Indian team, they're living in fear of their jobs.
Right.
You go and see our India team and you go to say, the world is changing. AI is here. You are the youngest, most technologically sophisticated team of any office at Apollo. You're good. Put your heads down and go back to work. You could say that in Zoom. You could go live with the people for a week, take them to dinner, go out with them in their homes, do their town hall, go through each group, and they really understand that what you've said means something, that you've thought about it. And unfortunately, or fortunately, there's no other way to convey these things other than directly, and with people you know, and with knowledge of their situation and what you're doing. That in a microcosm, I can't tell you if that's culture or communication. I think it's both. And I think that's half the job.
So as you think about, you know, we're living in this incredible period of innovation. AI is stealing, you know, everyone's mind share in some respects. But yet, as that grows, at the end of the day, Apollo is still a people business. You're still running a people business. How do you think about the growth and innovation as it relates to future leadership and talent development?
So it's an imperative. And so we have moved a lot of people around. So the observation I've made culturally is companies that are very successful, not just our company, but lots of companies have been successful. While they're on that curve up, they're doing great and everything's fine. And at some point they hit a plateau. And at that plateau, we find a lot of companies who no longer play to win. And what that means to me is the team becomes more fearful of losing than they are desirous of winning. They stop innovating. They stop appropriately risk-taking. They become fearful of every mistake. And so how do we here get people to play to win all the time, which is a big part of the theme of what we try and do? We normalize that we make mistakes. That doesn't mean investment mistakes and other things, but mistakes in people, mistakes in business. We have outside one of our best investors office, a wall of shame. This is a reminder that every one of us over our 42-year career has made a bad investment or made a series of bad decisions, and we've lived through it. Here, you make a bad decision, your job is to fix it and learn from it and move on from it, but not to be so fearful of making a mistake that you're paralyzed. This is a big part of what we're doing. And to innovate, you have to have a culture that's prepared to make a few mistakes along the way. But the theme, I think, is very clear. So 6 years ago, one of the things I said, which was a radical innovation, is I don't think our business is capital constrained. I think we're idea constrained. It sounds so obvious, but it wasn't obvious at the time because our industry had been capital constrained forever. Most of the energy was consumed in raising money. And what I said is, if you find a good idea today, it will go in a fund, it'll go on a balance sheet, it'll be syndicated, be co-invested. There's someone who will want a good idea. And so we reorganized the business 6 years ago around the capacity to originate versus the capacity to just raise money. All of a sudden, on a bunch of competitors' conference calls, I hear origination. People have just discovered it like it's, some secret sauce. It seemed obvious at the time, but it was a total change. And now we're saying something else, which is our business is now north of $1 trillion. Over the next few years, if things continue, we'll be north of $1.5 trillion. Is our future that we just get bigger and bigger doing the same thing? Because we have two businesses today. We are the largest retirement services company. We are a really big, I think we're the second largest private markets asset manager. I don't think the future is just doing these two things. I think these two businesses grow, but so many more things are coming to private markets.
Yep.
Innovation is our future. Innovation is our growth. And to get where we need to get to in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, we need to start today. We need to have all of the experimentation. And so part of what we're doing is we're going to open a second headquarters.
Okay.
To help people focus the mind on what's coming next. It will be away from our New York headquarters because the business itself as it exists is being confronted by technology, by societal and other changes. And I have every confidence the team will navigate this, but it's hard to ask them to do that and think about what comes next.
Yes.
So we're going to spend a lot of time out of New York City on what comes next.
You're touching on a lot of decision-making points, and I'm curious, as a CEO, what are the decisions that you are leading or need to be in the middle of versus the decisions your partners are driving?
Well, let's start with what my desire is. Anything someone else can do competently is one less thing I have to do.
I'm familiar with that.
And the second is something you know better than I know. You and I are not capable of running a business. We're just not. The business requires us to have a trusted group of partners. We can call them senior managers, but I call them partners. We are 4,000 people in asset management, 2,000 people in retirement services, and we have 200 partners. Most of my day, when I say culture, is spent on the career management and ambitions and style and leadership and well-being of 200 people. If I have the confidence of those 200 people, we win.
Yep.
Because they will spend their whole careers at Apollo. The next generation behind them will see that the partners ahead of them are here and will assume that there's a carrot at the end, not just a financial carrot, but an emotional. And then the young people in our business will have two amazing generations of mentors. And if those partners come and go, nothing else works. And so when it gets back to what decisions do I make, I steer people in the right direction. There are some times when we just have to say, this is it, this is what we're doing, but we run a partnership.
Yeah.
And my goal is for a subset of that partnership who is in leadership every day to persuade them that I am right, but in a culture where they can push back, they can challenge, and then eventually you just have to make a decision.
I think you said intellectual insubordination.
Yes.
I've heard you use that expression.
Which I like to distinguish from actual insubordination, but intellectual insubordination.
Yeah, yeah. Have you found that anything you're doing as a leader or as a manager has changed in the context of the rapid change? The world we're living in is so much more dynamic than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. Do you see yourself changing at all as a manager in that context?
I think we have to. You start and no one exactly trains you to be CEO or to be the leader of a business. You eventually figure out what works for you. And some of the best advice I've gotten along the way has come from, I'll give up a name, Rich Handler at Jefferies.
Yep.
And I said to Rich, I've seen every CEO in the financial services industry. I watch how they speak and how they do this. Why do you feel so comfortable? And he said, because I've figured out I'm just myself. I said, that's just brilliant. And so the more comfortable you get with just being yourself, the more honest it feels, the easier it is to do your job. And so whether it's wearing the sweater as opposed to the suit, or speaking the way I speak, or being outspoken on issues that are important to me, try to be myself in the job, because people know right away if you're not authentic with them. And then I also recognize that I have to keep changing. So I challenge myself all the time on new technology. How can I make decisions on the implications of AI and how fast, if I'm not forcing myself to change and to master it? No matter how uncomfortable that is sometimes.
You touched on a really important leadership trait that I think gets very little airtime and discussion, which is sort of genuineness. When you run an organization with a lot of smart people, they can figure out in a nanosecond when they're being spun. And I think there's probably not enough leaders that sort of focus on that first as a leadership characteristic, because I think it's probably in many respects the most powerful.
I certainly find it really powerful. Look, we have a lot of talented people around us. We're blessed that way.
Yep.
And sometimes they're actually all rowing in the same direction. But at the end of the day, people want the business to be organized. They want to have their say, but they understand there needs to be a decision made. They want to know they've been at the table, you've respected it, you've heard them, you're not dogmatic. And the more you welcome that, the more comfortable you are with that, I think the more success you have running smart people.
Yep.
In other businesses, perhaps, where there's a big difference between a small group of leaders and the workforce, maybe another style would work. I just have a hard time imagining a more authoritative, top-down, use your adjective of choice, working with your team or with my team.
Yep.
You have to have the goods, and they have to believe you're authentic.
I love the wall of shame, or whatever, however you refer to it, because the reality is there's been a massive amount of success here at Apollo, but obviously life is life, and we have our disappointments and failures. Any specific sort of thing in your life that didn't go to plan that you took away something really important from?
Look, there's just so many. You don't know where to start. The good news about our organization, and I think for me, is we tend not to make the same mistake twice, which shows at least that we can learn.
Yep.
And part of this is being willing to admit it. Cultures that are not willing to admit that something has gone wrong, they stick with it to the end. And I joke in private equity, you either get 2 times your money or 0. People tend not to sell things at 70 cents.
Right.
We're a culture that sells things at 70 cents. If we've made a bad decision, let's correct that decision and let's admit it. And by creating an environment where the CEO and the top leaders have said, boy, we really screwed that up. Now let's fix it. It's made it safe for the rest of the organization to say, this isn't going well. We should do the right thing for ourselves and for investors. And no one gets fired here for making a mistake. Everyone's made a mistake. You end up on the wrong side of history here if you don't admit the mistake, if you cover up the mistake, if you fail to acknowledge it.
Yep.
Because it almost always gets worse.
The hidden train ticket never gets better.
Exactly.
So I'd love to talk a little bit about public policy and sort of when leaders speak out, when they don't. How do you as a leader think about when you should, when you need to, or when you shouldn't comment on public policy matters?
I will speak for things as Apollo,
Yep.
but most often I'm speaking about things from my own point of view.
Yeah.
I try to make those distinctions clear, and sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. So when I think about the issues I've spoken out on, you could look at the things that have affected our industry. We were presented over the last 15 years with a black or white choice around climate.
Yep.
We were no hydrocarbons, or we were, Texas oil men. That's not a rational choice. We were very vocal. Our policy, really simple, make it better. That's it. There's no prohibition to financing gas or turbines or anything else. Make it better. Don't go backwards. Make it better.
Yep.
Similarly, with respect to notions of hiring, for that, what's our policy? Merit adjusted for distance traveled. What does that mean? It means you always want to hire the best person for the job, but you also have to look at how they got there. The person who had, two full-time jobs in college or was a student athlete and delivered just under gets adjusted for distance traveled. Someone who's overcome. That's who we hire. That's who you hire. You hire people who you think not here today, but what their potential is.
Yep.
And so on issues that overlap our business, climate, hiring, I feel very comfortable articulating something that is not what I've said, it's what the firm believes. And how do we make it clear to our employees, to our partners? No issue. There are other issues, for instance, this outrage of anti-Semitism we've seen, where it is not clear to me that Apollo needs to speak on anti-Semitism. Marc Rowan speaks on anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with Apollo. It has everything to do with who I am, the fact that I also am CEO of Apollo. Great.
I think, by the way, that gets back to what we talked about a few minutes ago about authenticity as a leader. And I think even if people aren't fully in agreement with your point of view, I think they appreciate your willingness to stand up candidly and honestly about it.
It's interesting. We don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
And there was a time where I was very, very visible, particularly at my alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania. And I was on national television and other things. And the number of emails, texts, notes that I got about moral leadership internally was just off the charts. I don't think everyone agreed with me. I don't think everyone even cared about these issues. But they respected the fact that I took a moral position. I believed in it, I rationalized it, I said it, and I did what I did.
Yeah, and I think people want to be proud of where they work, and some fair bit of that is being proud of the leaders who run their company.
The number of times people have said to me, I work here because of what you've done.
Yeah.
Or I appreciate what you've done. Or people, sometimes I have a funny story. I'm in Arizona, I'm coming down in an elevator, and someone says, are you Marc Rowan? And in these days, it's 50-50. You have to be very careful. And I said yes, and they said, can I just give you a hug? And it's for being outspoken, it's for being a moral leader, and that happens more often than you would think.
Yep.
People respect it. I don't take it that they agree with me. They respect that you're willing to take a position that is principled, that you believe in.
Yeah, that's great. Where do you, from a philanthropic standpoint, where do you like to spend your time? What are the things that you care most deeply about?
So I have a couple, which is first the longest running. For the last 37 years, I am one of the founders of something called YRF DARCA, and I oversee a massively large school network in Israel.
Wow.
Think of this as the periphery of Israel, either the socioeconomic periphery, the geographic periphery, the religious, ethnic periphery. These kids look in many ways like, for a New Yorker, the South Bronx. Mm-hmm. And you come into a place where the kids are passing their college entry requirements, which is different than the US, in the 15 to 30% range. And 3 years later, they're in the 95% range.
Wow.
With union teachers teaching a state curriculum with open admission. So we're now 37 years later, 60 schools, 36,000 kids, 3,200 union teachers. And everywhere we've done it, it works. The second here is the fight against anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. I am currently the chair of UJA, which I'm privileged to do and have a number of philanthropic interests. And the third is more around business and good government. One of the things I've been instrumental in is what's called the Penn Wharton budget model. So I am on the board of the Wharton School for the last 28 years, which I think is 20 years beyond the term I wanted.
Wow.
And I've been chair for at least the last 8 years.
Yeah.
Finally coming to an end on June 30. But
I'll note you outlived the...
Exactly. Many. I've outlived a lot. But we've built the Penn Wharton budget model to give lawmakers, to give economists, to give decision makers the tools necessary to answer the question, what if? We are in a really unusual time. In the US, we have the best hand of any country anywhere. We have an amazing capital cycle. We have an amazing capital market. We have an educated workforce. We're energy independent. We have all the things you need to succeed. We have a massive amount of government debt and massive amounts of inefficiency. We will likely not address them until a crisis moment. What should that look like? Why should we wait for that crisis moment to plan? We also have the means to fix this.
Yep.
We have the tools to fix it. We have the ideas to fix it. It's all about change and accepting change. And so through this philanthropic endeavor, which is run by the Wharton School, which I'm privileged to be an investor in, it's been great. And I hope not to need it anytime soon, but something tells me we may need it.
That's awesome.
Thank you for all the time today. That was a lot of fun and a lot of informative. So many of your questions, though, were about culture. Let me show you a piece of culture at Apollo.
I'd love to see it. Thank you.
Welcome to Froyo at Apollo. I open it when we have a team win.
Okay.
People are so excited for recognition.
Yes.
For a note that says, congratulations, the firm is having Froyo. You would think I was giving away money. But recognition is a really important part of our culture. And a Froyo day is among the most exciting things for people. But on the culture side, we are now 4,000 people. And if you are a young person coming to our firm, we are able to teach you the business and the culture. But if we hire you after 15 or 20 years someplace else, I have no doubt we can make you successful. But how do I teach you our culture?
Yep.
And if you work for me directly, you learn our culture one way, Zelter, Zito, so on and so on. And so we had a 6-month negotiation. What is our culture? What are the things that we want? And 80 drafts later, and literally 80 drafts later, we decided on what makes Apollo Apollo.
So everybody was an author in this process.
Yeah, but eventually someone has to take the blue pen and say, this is what we're doing. And I did it. It's on our website. And more than a deck, it's how we train. It's how we onboard. It's how we promote. It's how we compensate. And if we do this right, we'll get it right. Because more change is coming to our business over the next 5 years than's happened in the last 10. The kinds of people we're going to need are different than the kinds of people we historically have hired. We're going to add many more people from different cultures. And getting this right is the most important thing we do.
Yeah. One of the things that I notice about you personally is there's a casualness to you. The Rowan sweaters. We think about.
I'm certainly on brand.
we think about, executives in suits and ties and so forth. And, I remember Steve Jobs had his black mock turtlenecks and Marc Rowan has his sweaters. How did that all come about?
This is how I like to be.
Yeah.
I've been this way for as long as I can possibly imagine. And I tell people, if people see me in a suit and tie, they almost get scared. But I tell them there are 2 reasons. If you're my regulator, I will wear a suit and tie anywhere I see you. And if you have been elected to national office and I'm seeing you in your office, I will wear a suit and tie. But if you're coming to me and you're asking me for a campaign contribution, I'm wearing what I want to wear.
It's probably disarming, too, to your colleagues.
It is, but it's a culture here of dress for your day.
Yeah.
Know what's appropriate.
Yeah.
If you're seeing clients and those clients are formal, dress appropriately. If you're comfortable and in the office, be comfortable and in the office. We can't babysit. We need people who really understand what it means to represent the image of the firm. And we're not a scary group of Wall Street people. We're here solving problems for ordinary companies and ordinary Americans.
Yep. So I've got one last question for you. I have a philosophy in life that, the things we really need to know to be successful, we learned as 5-year-olds with our parents. Say please, say thank you, share your things, don't hit your sister. Do you have a simplifying philosophy that you kind of think about or go to?
I don't know that it's quite that simple, although I like that. I wake up every day and I think we're the luckiest people in the world. We're lucky to be in this country. We're lucky to be who we are and to do what we do, to have achieved the level of success. And so every day is a good day. There's just different levels of good.
Yeah.
And so if you start with that, let's recognize what it is we're doing and let's treat people accordingly.
That's a genuine.
And it's a very genuine way to come
Yeah.
out. I do think, for the most part, we're the luckiest people in the world.
Yeah. Really clarifying. Marc, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Really appreciate it.
Total pleasure.
Yeah.
All right, let's do some work now.
Okay.